Something happened this morning that almost nobody is fully connecting yet. A drone just struck the only nuclear power plant in the entire Arab world. And this wasn't some random attack in a desert somewhere. This was calculated, deliberate, and timed with terrifying precision. We are about to break down exactly why this single strike could be the moment that changes everything, and why what comes next in the next 72 hours may determine whether a much bigger war begins. Stay with me because point number 3 is where this gets truly alarming. 5 things just happened in the last 48 hours that the world is not putting together, and when you see them all lined up, you will understand exactly why the Middle East is now sitting on a razor's edge. Number 1. A drone just hit a nuclear power plant, and this is only the beginning of what we know. 3 drones crossed over the UAE's western border with Saudi Arabia this morning. 2 were intercepted, 1 got through.
That one drone struck the Barakah Nuclear Energy Plant in Abu Dhabi's Al Dhafra region, the first and only operational nuclear facility on the entire Arabian Peninsula, built at a cost of $20 billion. Abu Dhabi authorities confirmed an electrical generator caught fire on the grounds of the plant. No injuries were reported. No radiological safety impact. All units were declared operating normally. So far, so contained, right? But here's where it gets much more serious. The IAEA confirmed that one reactor briefly had to rely on emergency diesel generators following the strike. Let that land for a second. A nuclear reactor switched to emergency backup power because of a drone near a live nuclear plant. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi expressed grave concern and stated that military activity threatening nuclear safety is completely unacceptable, reiterating a call for maximum military restraint near any nuclear power plant. No group has officially claimed responsibility. Suspicion immediately fell on Iran, which has been increasingly threatening the UAE over recent days as the country hosted Israeli Iron Dome missile defenses and troops during the war. This plant isn't just symbolic. Barakah supplies around 25% of the UAE's entire electricity needs and avoids 22.4 million tons of carbon emissions annually, the equivalent of removing 4.8 million cars from the road. Hitting it sends a message, and that message is, nowhere is off limits. Number 2. Trump just rejected Iran's peace proposal, and the reason why reveals everything. While the drone was striking Abu Dhabi, diplomatic talks between Washington and Tehran were already in freefall. The White House believed it was getting close to a 1-page memorandum of understanding, a 14-point framework that would declare an end to the war and open a 30-day window for detailed nuclear negotiations. But President Trump, speaking on his return flight from China, made clear where his red line sits. He looked at Iran's response and threw it away after the very first sentence. His exact words, "If I don't like the first sentence, I just throw it away." He called it an unacceptable sentence. The issue? Nuclear. Any form of nuclear activity from Iran is where Trump draws the line, and the gap between what Washington is demanding and what Tehran is willing to offer is enormous. Iran initially proposed a 5-year moratorium on uranium enrichment. The U.S. demanded 20 years. The current discussions suggest the likely landing point is somewhere between 12 and 15 years. That's still a massive disagreement, and that's before you even get to Iran's existing uranium stockpile. Here's the detail that should concern you. Iran is believed to hold approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. A 90% threshold is what's needed to produce a nuclear weapon. They are not at weapons grade, but they are dangerously close to the threshold where crossing over becomes a question of days, not years. Trump himself said that most points in the negotiations were agreed to, but the only point that truly mattered, nuclear, was not. He described Iran as unyielding on the issue. If you're watching this and thinking that sounds like talks going nowhere, you're right. And the clock is ticking.
If you're finding this breakdown valuable, do me a quick favor right now. Hit that like button and subscribe to Verified Bulletin. Every day we cut through the noise and give you the real picture. Now, point number 3 is where things shift from alarming to genuinely dangerous. Number 3. Iran is playing a strategy of deception and delay, and regional intelligence knows it.
Regional intelligence officials are now openly stating that inside Iran, the assessment is clear. Tehran believes that if they can buy enough time, they make it harder for the U.S. to resume military operations. This isn't speculation. This is the strategic calculation being made inside the Iranian leadership right now. Iran has been pressing for a multi-stage negotiation process. First, end the war, then discuss nuclear issues later. For weeks, Trump and his administration resisted that framing, insisting that nuclear concessions had to be part of any preliminary deal. But Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf has publicly called any negotiations with the U.S. unreasonable while the Lebanon conflict continued. Iranian officials have accused the United States of changing their negotiating position. Their foreign minister stated that attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities have already happened once, yet the U.S. is again threatening the same targets, calling these, quote, contradictory statements that reveal what he described as the depth of America's confusion. The problem with that framing? It ignores a crucial reality. Iran still holds a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which a fifth of the world's oil and natural gas passed before the war began. That stranglehold is Iran's single biggest bargaining chip, and Washington knows it. The proposed framework deal would require Iran to lift restrictions on transit through the Strait of Hormuz, which have been choking global energy flows and shipping since early March. In return, the U.S. would lift its naval blockade of Iranian ports, imposed on April 13th, which has blocked a critical source of revenue for the country. 2 blockades, 2 choke points, and a world economy hanging in the balance. Iran's foreign minister described the situation as an agreement being just inches away, but simultaneously criticized what he called maximalist demands from U.S. negotiators. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Inches away can mean everything or nothing. And in this specific situation, every hour of delay is an hour that Iran uses to reinforce, to regroup, and to recalculate. That's the deception and delay strategy, and it's working, for now. Number 4. The Kharg Island option is on the table, and it could collapse Iran's economy overnight. Most people haven't heard of Kharg Island. By the end of this point, you'll understand why its name might be dominating global headlines very soon. Kharg Island accounts for approximately 90% of Iran's entire crude oil export capacity. 90% from one island. That sits in the Persian Gulf. Trump has a menu of escalation options available if negotiations collapse.
One of those, reportedly being discussed seriously at the highest levels, is the possibility of U.S. forces moving on Kharg Island. Not just bombing it, moving on it, taking it, cutting off Iran's economic lifeline completely and permanently, not just through a naval blockade, but through direct physical control of the country's primary oil export infrastructure. Israeli officials have already told reporters that the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports is an existential threat for the Iranian regime, because internally, the regime grows weaker every single day the blockade holds. Trump himself signaled in a Fox News interview that he wants to continue the naval blockade, believing Iran's oil export system is so pressurized that it could, in his words, explode from within days. Add Kharg Island to that equation, and you're talking about an economic collapse scenario that would make every previous sanction regime look mild by comparison. The Iranian leadership knows this, and that knowledge is precisely what is driving their desperation to buy time at the negotiating table. The question is whether Trump gives them that time, or whether the drone that struck a nuclear plant in Abu Dhabi this morning
just made that decision for him. Number 5. The USS Gerald R. Ford just came home, and what it means for what comes next. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group returned to the United States after completing what became the longest deployment of a U.S. aircraft carrier since the Vietnam War. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth called the work of these sailors phenomenal. He described their mission using 2 words: absolute resolve. Their operation was named Epic Fury, and officially, Secretary of State Marco Rubio declared that Operation Epic Fury, the air and naval campaign launched on February 28 against Iran, is now concluded. But here's what nobody is fully analyzing. The return of the Gerald Ford does not mean the U.S. is standing down. Rubio stated that what Washington now seeks is a memorandum of understanding for future negotiations, not a full withdrawal from the region, not a declaration of victory, and not a removal of military pressure on Iran. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched large-scale coordinated strikes on Iran, targeting military leadership and nuclear infrastructure. A conditional ceasefire was agreed between the U.S. and Iran on April 8, but Tehran has since resumed strikes against Gulf Arab states. Sunday's strike on the Barakah Nuclear Plant marks the first time the 4-reactor facility has been directly targeted in the Iran war. A conditional ceasefire that no longer holds. A carrier group that just left. Drone strikes on nuclear infrastructure that are escalating this morning, and a diplomatic framework that Trump just rejected in its first sentence. And then there's this. Overnight, President Trump posted a series of AI-generated images on Truth Social. One showed him standing at a military command center with outgoing missiles and Space Force imagery in the background. The caption on another image read simply, "It was the calm before the storm." That phrase, calm before the storm, was used by Trump before in 2017, and it sent intelligence agencies and foreign governments into urgent consultations. He used it again this morning. Intentional or not, the world noticed. So what happens now? Here's the full picture. A 14-point memorandum of understanding is being negotiated between Trump's envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and Iranian officials, both directly and through mediators. A deal, if reached, would start a 30-day clock on formal negotiations covering the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear program, and the lifting of U.S. sanctions. Marco Rubio, while expressing some optimism, described Iran's top leaders as insane in the brain and said it was genuinely unclear whether they would make a deal. Iran's foreign minister has separately said an agreement is just inches away, but the two sides remain publicly miles apart on the fundamental issue of nuclear enrichment duration and verification. The U.S. wants Iran to commit to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment, an enhanced inspections regime including snap inspections by UN inspectors, and a clause preventing Iran from operating underground nuclear facilities. Iran, for its part, insists it will never fully surrender its enrichment rights, calling it a matter of national sovereignty. Every single one of these 5 developments points in the same direction: a powder keg, a lit match, and a negotiating table that is struggling to stay standing. Concurrently, diplomatic negotiations between Iran and the U.S. have ground to a complete standstill, creating a highly volatile environment where a shaky ceasefire threatens to collapse entirely. The potential breakdown of this fragile truce risks tipping the wider Middle East back into a state of open warfare, a catastrophic scenario that would drastically prolong the worldwide energy crisis originally sparked by the conflict. And remember, 1/5 of all global oil and gas supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran still controls it. A full return to open war doesn't just affect the Middle East, it affects fuel prices, shipping costs, global inflation, and supply chains that touch every single country on Earth. Here's your bottom line from verified Bulletin. A nuclear plant was struck by a drone this morning for the first time in this war. Trump has rejected Iran's opening response. The strategic delay Iran is running is buying them time they may not have. Kharg Island is a live option,
And the USS Gerald R just came home while tension is spiking, not easing. The next 72 hours matter more than most people realize, and we will be here covering every development as it breaks, verified, sourced, and real. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what's really happening right now, smash that like button because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need this information. Subscribe to Verified Bulletin so you never miss a crucial update, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Trump resumes operations, or does Iran blink first? Tell us what you think. We read every single comment. We'll see you in the next one.